Well, hello and welcome to the WealthE Wednesday Power Hour with myself, Lyndon Booth. And tonight I'm joined by Alex Impey, who I will introduce in a second. And of course, our head of community, Lee. Good evening, Lee.
Hi, Lyndon. Hi, Alex. Hi, everybody online. It's great to be online for our second session of WealthE Wednesday. We look forward to hearing about the 5 key due diligence principles from Alex and learning more about him as we go through the webinar. So we encourage you, as always, to type your questions that you want him to answer or any of us to answer in the question box. I will be monitoring it as always. And let's have a great learning and interactive session.
Fantastic. And to start the interaction, I'm sitting tonight in what I call my high performance office, which is a little hut. Well, not quite a hut. It's an old building in the middle of a reserve. The nearest person from me is probably about 50 kilometers away, but I get out here when I've got a lot of work to do that needs no phones and no as little contact from our team as possible. So I'm on high strategic retreat. But I've just had a thunderstorm, which has been beautiful, and I'm sitting here. I would love to know whereabouts in the world all of you are joining us from tonight, and including yourself, Lee. Where are you tonight, and how's the weather outside?
So I'm joining you from Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. It is overcast and windy. It's been threatening to rain all day, but we haven't had a drop yet. Last night was a huge sandstorm, so we are grateful for clearer skies in terms of air condition today, but looking forward to some sun in the next couple of days.
Brilliant. And just to make sure that all of you who have joined us tonight are alive and awake and that you know where the question box is, please go to the question section on your screen and just type in where in the world you are, just so that we can make sure that you actually are with us. And then Alex, fantastic to have you on board. Alex is I asked him earlier what title he wanted, and he said he didn't like CEO. He said it was an overused title. So I'm going to call Alex the founder, the head of property, the property guru, the due diligence man at USA. Alex, really great to have you online tonight. Thank you for joining us and for coming and sharing your information. And before we actually get into the content, where are you sitting tonight?
So you were talking about sitting in your high performance office. I'm sitting in my high performance window bay, surveying the street below me. So lots of seagulls and lots of seagull droppings. So nothing inspirational on my side, unfortunately, unlike yourselves. But I'm over in Aberdeen in the United Kingdom. I believe you've got an Aberdeen over there as well in South Africa. Maybe quite similar, we're not sure, but yeah, over here at the moment in the UK.
All right, brilliant. Well, let's just quickly check in on the question panel. Thank you. Please keep dropping in where you're from. We have someone from Blackpan. Welcome. We've got someone from Nigeria. We have someone from France. We've got UK, South Africa, another South Africa again, Sussex in England. So we are dropping in from all around the world tonight. We really appreciate you being here. And please, throughout the evening, please do make sure that whenever you have a question, please do interrupt us. Both Alex and I spend a lot of time on webinars talking. We often get tired of our own voices, and we'd really appreciate the questions that are coming from Lee when you get them. So Lee will be managing the questions as they come through, interrupting us and making sure that we deal with them. So Alex, I don't really want to waste our time tonight, so let's go straight over to you. Maybe you can first, before you dive in, just tell us a little bit about yourself and about you, sir.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much, guys, for the opportunity for Wealth Migrate, and good evening, afternoon, whatever time zone we're on. Welcome to everyone on the WealthE Wednesday. So I hope this is of real importance, and this can provide a piece of real beneficial advice to you guys on real estate investment. From my side, I'm just going to quickly bump into this. So my name is Alex Impey. I'm from the northeast of England. I try not to speak with a northeastern accent, because otherwise you guys wouldn't understand me. So I'll try to keep myself a little bit clearer. But if you do hear me sliding into northern tones, please feel free to poke me and tell me to speak a little bit more clearer. I'll happily do so. So obviously, I'm, as you said, Lyndon, I'm the founder, the head of property operations for USA. and we're very much a niche development company. I'll just pop onto this side. This is just a little bit about us. We've got one big mantra, similar to Wealth Migrate and other companies, and that's what we call our MTP, Massive Transform Purpose, and that's to make quality living both affordable and enjoyable for everyone. It's quite a big statement, and we want to live by that and really game change how property development, and that's both commercial and residential, is actually done in the UK and eventually around the world as well. So very niche, very specific. So that's user in general. And then myself, I've been working in property for over 6 years now, in various forms of development in residential and commercial. And then also from my corporate background, I've had over 10 years in industry. I worked as a chartered mechanical engineer, and that took me all over the world in some very challenging landscapes and infrastructure. And I've worked out in Dubai, I've worked over in Holland, Europe, I've worked out in Iraq, I've worked out in the North Sea. So yes, I get all of the glamorous locations like Aberdeen, I'm sure. And but within that corporate background, worked heavily on capital expenditure, risk management, risk mitigation, everything that you see in a property development and property investment, I did on the corporate level for over 10 years. So yeah, that's roughly me in a nutshell. Like I said, and what Lee said earlier, I'll be talking to you guys on a little bit on due diligence today. And I know in the Wealth Migrate WhatsApp groups, I've put some information on there in the past. I think there was a real drive by the community to understand a little bit more about what makes good due diligence when you're looking at real estate investments. And I'm going to keep this very broad, so I know we've got a global community: South Africa, New Zealand, Nigeria, Australia, UK. All the principles I'll talk about tonight can be used in all locations. And I'm speaking to you guys with experience from property investing in other people's deals, but also looking at deals that we are doing and that we have done, what I would expect the other investors to ask of me. And I'm always very, very, very harsh in some cases to my investors, because I do ask them to say, look, guys, these are the things you should be asking me to make sure you can satisfy all the due diligence criteria. So hopefully you will have a really good 40-45 minutes. Like Lyndon said, I hate the sound of my own voice and my monotones, so please interrupt me, please ask me any questions. If I can't answer it, I will tell you truthfully and I will go away and find it, but hopefully I will have all the answers for you guys during this next 45 minutes.
Alex, great. And so maybe I can just jump in here and say it's no coincidence that we're having you doing this tonight. Wealth Migrate is very excited this year that we're going to be expanding quite aggressively into the UK and into Europe in terms of bringing new deals. And I think, someone who operates in the UK, it's great to be having your perspective on what due diligence should look like, and as investors, what the kind of questions you should be asking when sponsors bring deals to the platform. So that's at the core, I think, of why we're very excited to have you on tonight. And for all our investors, my wish for you, my invitation, is really to think about this as almost a study session, so that as Wealth Migrate starts bringing more and more deals, and as you come across other deals in different environments, different platforms, that you really have equipped yourself with what are the key points that you want to look at before you make an investment decision into a commercial real estate opportunity. And that's at the heart of tonight. It's really about empowering us all to be much better investors with a much better set of questions and understanding of what we should be looking at. So Alex, let's dive in.
Perfect. Okay, so I quite like a thought process. As an engineer, I'm very process orientated, and I came across this just a couple of days ago actually, so I thought it was a good way to start things. Confucius, an ancient Chinese philosopher, he's got quite a lot of good work, so go check him out if you haven't already. But one of his thought processes is that the expectations of life depend upon diligence. The mechanic that would perfect his work must first sharpen his tools. And as a mechanical engineer, I don't think that could be any more apt, especially in my previous corporate life. But due diligence is a continual process. You know, I think Stephen Covey talks about sharpening the saw always. You have to keep yourself up to date through, you know, a continual professional development piece, keeping up to the latest trends, you know, the latest requirements from financial compliance, etc., etc. So it's always important that, you know, wherever you want to do and excel, you put that time and you put that diligence in. And hopefully you will find a little bit more about how to do that tonight on the investment side.
Lee, okay, it sounds like you need to get Alex to help plug the inner circle for those who aren't yet members of our inner circle.
Yeah, absolutely. He sounds like he's our perfect partner to go through with that. So we will be having another call on another project very soon, Alex.
I'll be
just for those of you who are not aware, WealthE has an inner circle. It's a collective group where we all learn together and make sure that we're keeping up to date on the tools, everything Alex has just said. So I decided to be fairly transparently sly here and do a little advertising pitch for the inner circle. So if there are any of you who are not yet part of the inner circle, Alex's #1 point was that you need to keep informed. So please reach out to Lee and she'll make sure that you can become part of that community of us all learning together. So after that commercial break, Alex, back to you.
No worries, buddy. Fine. So what I wanted to first talk about is, you know, we're all looking at real estate investments, and that can be residential, it can be commercial, but typically every transaction or property acquisition follows a process. This is a process that we use in USER, and you know, this is a process flow diagram. It just goes through the various stages and the various elements within a deal to get from start to finish. And the reason why I wanted to show you this is not to teach you to suck eggs, but more to show you the areas which you should have an eye on when you're looking to do your due diligence. And it really starts from the search process, doing online desktop searches. You can all do that at the power of your home. And if a deal lands on your table, you should be doing your detective work from the very first minute and looking at the details of the site, review and planning, looking at the analysis, looking at the numbers, moving forward, looking at the design, you know, what concepts have been given to you, what planning issues might be in there, what commercial and funding issues might be brought about by this. And literally take each aspect of this property acquisition process and always take each element and look how you, when you are doing your due diligence, and benchmark against each one. Because you will often find problems or issues in each one of these elements. So it's more just to say, okay, this is how we purchase commercial property, and this is also how we do our own due diligence. And I thought it was quite a nice way to share what we do from a commercial perspective, but hopefully also this is of use to you guys in your own everyday real estate investment choices. So, straight into it. I never like to mess around, and I'm going to give you all 5 key principles in one go. I'm sure Lee and Lyndon are probably thinking, well, this is not going to last very long if he's going to give all of his secrets away. But that's just the kind of guy I am. I just like to get it all out on the table. And I think a few guys within the inner circle, so I'll do an unashamed plug there as well, had asked me a question about this previously, and I'd mentioned a model that's quite commonly used in the UK and Europe, and it's called the CREST model. And each one of these letters and acronyms is one of the key principles. You know, there's 5 in total. CREST is 5 letters, and each one of those is one of those points that we're going to discuss tonight. And CREST essentially stands for credibility. R is typically return, but I also like to use the risks and return, because I think, you know, there is no risk without reward. We always try and make it asymmetric where risk is low and reward is high, but we also always need to consider the risks when we look at the return. We look at the exit points of the deal. How do we get out? Look at the security perspective. That's how you having a guarantee for the money you're putting in. You know, how are you going to get that back out, and how are they securing that money for you? And the last point is T, which is typically a timeline, a timetable but I also put in there a trust element, because at that point in time, you should have developed enough trust to be able to move on with that deal. So this is essentially, what I wouldn't even say for real investment. I think this is really applicable to any investment. If it's stocks or shares, cryptocurrencies, whiskey, even if you're going to go down and buy yourself an ice cream, maybe do the Crest model beforehand just to make sure you're getting a good deal with that ice cream vendor. It can be so varied, but it's an incredibly powerful tool to make sure every time you do the same things and repeat it. That's at the end of the day, you want a consistent way of doing your due diligence. You don't want to do a scattergun approach where you may miss something. And this Crest model really does provide that focused attention on that. So what we'll do, we're going to pop through each one, and then I'll really dig into some of the technical details. What I would say is I'm going to go through quite some technical points in the next few slides. And this is typically in relation to bigger developments, and they can be pure commercial, they could be pure residential, or it could be a mixed use scheme. Those technical points, there will be some examples based around the UK and things that we're doing, but this still can be very applicable. Some of the terminology might change slightly from South Africa to New Zealand, but the core principles will stay the same. So if you do have questions on that, please ask me, and I'll try and reword it in a non-geographical potential so that it can be understood. Okay. So first of all, credibility. That's the C in our Crest model. Like I said before, when you are doing your due diligence, you've got to consider yourself like a digital detective. And that's, to be honest, I get quite a lot of pleasure out of doing these, especially when I'm looking at deals that are given to me for other people who want me to invest. And I really get in there, probably a little bit like the CSI, a bit too forensic perhaps, but I get a real good enjoyment of picking apart a deal and finding, was there a hole here or was there something missed? And often you can find a lot of things which the original developer or the person who wants you to invest has probably missed. So always consider yourself a detective, and you should always be doing that from a digital perspective as well. So when we look at credibility, obviously credibility can be split into two aspects. The first aspect is on the developer and the team. So who is offering you this opportunity and what is their team? And you really want to look at credibility of them. And then the second one is the credibility of the deal by itself. Yeah, and we've got to look at both separate. So let's take the developer and the team first. And I'm going to go through a few bullet points. I'll elaborate. But if you guys have questions in the meantime, I'm sure Lee can pop them in as well. But the first thing is you always want to know who the developer is, who is the company, but also who is the person behind that company. Because often, a lot of deals aren't done because of the business. The deals are done because of the person and that person driving behind them. You want to know basic things about, what's their digital footprint? What are they doing online? Are they an ethical person? Have they been trading for a long time? Have they been operating for a long time? Is it a short time? What kind of things have they done prior to this deal, this opportunity come along? I think often we get hung up about experience, and although experience is very important, it doesn't always necessarily have to be in a particular arena. And so I always look at inside the property sphere, but look at outside the property sphere. Ask the questions about what is their corporate life like? What did they do before property development or property investment? Everyone's got a history, and that history will build up and provide you a picture on the credibility of that person. Someone might have just moved into, let's say, medical commercial acquisitions. They might never have done a medical commercial acquisition prior, but they might have spent 15 years as a head of real estate investment and acquisitions for one of the major companies, like JBL or JLL, sorry, JBL for the music piece. It could be Knight Franks, it could be something along those lines where they've got a hell of a lot of experience. It might not be quite in that niche environment, but they've got a lot of relevant experience to carry into. Don't be afraid to ask them for a CV. ask to get those details, try and extract as much information as you can about that person, build up a blanket of trust and a blanket of credibility. Maybe require that you have a number of conversations on that as well.
Yeah, so Alex, you know what's really interesting for me listening to what you're saying here today is two things come up for me. The first one is when we run investor masterminds with some of our investors, we often have conversations around due diligence, and there are two types. I'm simplifying, but there are two types of investors: those who love technical due diligence and those who hate a spreadsheet and don't want to go anywhere near it. And what's often interesting is when we have these conversations in the mastermind and we start understanding how some very successful investors make investment decisions without actually enjoying the technical bit. And they say their skill is in understanding people. So their due diligence is never on actually the property, the deal, the model. It's about, have they got to a point where they trust the people who are involved? And that was a really interesting learning for us as a Wealth Migrate platform. It made us realize that as we are developing our approach to investors, we need to be giving them two opportunities. Firstly, absolutely the opportunity to see what the deal is about. What are the numbers? What are the figures? What is the planning? What is the business model? But as importantly as we need to be creating opportunities for them to get to know the people. Because it's become really interesting. We have a group of investors, and a fairly significant one, that make their investment decisions based on their intuition and their ability to judge and find out about people rather than about numbers and statistics. So I'm really interested because I think you've captured that quite well here. The second thing that was really interesting for me is you spoke here about know who the person is. So one of the things when we do due diligence on our sponsors is we are most interested when we come across a sponsor who has a single charismatic founder. So in other words, when that company started 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 10 years ago, the ones that are successful are often the sponsors where there was a single person who was very passionate about real estate in general, but their niche in particular. And the early years of their company was built around that particular founder. And we have often seen that the ethics, the passion, the attention to detail that the founder created has then spread throughout the company and has often led to the success of a sponsor. So I think your key point here is absolutely perfect. And you mentioned it, you really should find out who is the key, who's actually driving the business, whose passion it is to put together the projects they're putting together, and have they been able to maintain that passion over a long period of time.
Correct. I think that's one of the next points is, it's great knowing about the person, but you need to know why they're doing this, and a why will tell you a lot about a person. And I'm not saying that you should only go for people who have got fantastic visions that are both for social and financial gain, but you find the people who are driven by something that transcends themselves can then do a lot more for the business, but also for the investors. It's a much more holistic approach. They'll really dig down to their why. And and I think, like you said, for those guys who make their investment decisions on the person, they will need to align themselves to a why and the values of that person. Just like when you create a life mate and you find a wife or a husband, you need someone who's aligned to your values. And it's just the same as an investment. An investment is quite a big decision to make, almost like a marriage in some cases. You need to be very much aligned with that person and realize that they want the same things as you want, which is a mutual benefit and a good outcome. So always look at their why and have a really good look at that piece as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Your marriage analogy there is very similar. For many of you who are listening tonight, I'm sure you've heard and have been on many webinars with Scott, our CEO. And Scott always says that real estate investment is about a long-term partnership with your partner. It's not so much about the deals. It's about, have you chosen the right partners up front, and are you prepared to have that long-term relationship with them? And that is the secret to building a great portfolio over time, is making sure you continuously improving your ability to partner and select the great partners.
Correct. I think Simon Sinek talks about, I may trust you with my life, but do I trust you with my money and my wife? And he was talking about how servicemen often trying to make, get the camaraderie and trust each other in kind of battle situations. But take that anecdotal away, I think you really do need to understand the longer term approach and have that alignment session 100%. I think also another good character judgment is the people that those guys associate with, and that don't just look at a professional team, but look at the people who they partner themselves out within the industry, so potential mentors or key partners, long-term strategic partners. Then you will get a really good feeling about the credibility of that person. You know, are they working with people who are also got credibility in that industry that you recognise? Are they partnering with platforms who have got credibility and have got that same kind of aspirations and inspirations that you want? When you kind of find out who that person is aligned with, or the developer is aligned with, or the company is aligned with, you'll get a good feeling on the longer term approach on things. I put the last one in there, and it's always a little bit of a, you know, do you put it in? But I think you need to be transparent up front. And, you know, declarations and bankruptcy checks. Now, I think it would not to say that anyone who's been bankrupt is a bad person or a poor developer or a poor person to have trust in, but having transparency around that is still very important. Actually, one of the deals we just concluded on, the investors did some third-party due diligence, which I strongly advised them on, and they came back and said, "Oh, we've done a bankruptcy check on you, and everything's okay." It's actually good. You know, it's good to know that I wasn't bankrupt, but you know, these things should be brought out in the open, and they shouldn't be shied away from. If you are a credible developer and you want to genuinely help your investors, you should give them every opportunity to do those checks and have that comfort within them. So never feel that you can't ask these things, and always bring that up with the team or the developer who's giving you that opportunity.
So Alex, for the person doing desktop due diligence from their home on a UK space, are there websites they go to specifically to do the bankruptcy checks? Are there we certainly know of ours around the world in the UK, but from your perspective, what would you recommend people use if they wanted to do on a UK developer, for example?
There's a couple of bankruptcy online checks that you can do. I mean, an easy one, if you've got a solicitor, you can just ask them to run one. I don't have any off the top of my head, but I can. What I'll do after this, remind me, Lee, Lyndon, I will put in one of the links of one that I do know. I don't know from off the top of my head. But yeah, if you just go ask your solicitor as well, they can quickly run those checks for you.
Yep, great, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so the first part of the credibility is the developer and the team. The professional team is also quite important. Then the next piece is the actual deal itself. And from a credibility level, you're looking in generally a high level initially at this deal. We're not looking at every single piece of the deal. We're just wanting to see, does it make sense? Is it a credible deal? You know, has this developer done something similar before? You know, where is the location of the deal? Now, you know, if a developer is selling themselves on holiday homes in Saint-Tropez, and then they're offering a deal in, I don't know, Basra in Iraq, you might then want to question, you know, what's the credibility around this particular deal? You know, if this then suddenly changed location and that hasn't been part of the model, you'd want to do some extra work on that. You know, that's not becoming credible anymore. I put this one in here. Is it a niche, and will a model work for this deal? Interestingly, we're working with, I know a developer who's got quite a large facility down in Peterborough at the moment, and they're looking. They had some potential. Well, they're having some potential issues with development finance, and one of the contractors went against the wall and having problems getting a new one in. And you know, the discussion on that was, you know, how could we avoid that from a niche perspective? And you know, one of the conversations was you should always have a repeatable model. So in this case, have something that you do and do really well and do over and over again. It may be just residential, it may be medical and commercial, it could be just mixed uses. But you know, maybe you don't want to create airline hotels, and then the next minute you're going to be doing airport lounges, and the next minute you're going to be doing, you know, residential real estate. Try and keep in opportunities which are niched, where you can also niche your own experience. I find also personally that then works better, because when you do the due diligence, you have got a lot of information and knowledge in that area. What are the requesting? look at the scope and then look at the cost. And, you know, they'll ask you often for an amount of money for a fundraise. Just do a quick, you know, a logical thought process in your head of how much are they asking versus what they want. Yeah, so if someone was asking you for high-end apartments in Sydney and they were going to create 100 apartments, but they only wanted, you know, $500,000 Aussie dollars as an initial investment raise, you probably start thinking, well, that doesn't seem to tally up. You know, it's going to be a very big cost. You're going to need quite a lot of equity initially. So, you know, how is that being raised? And so that then would take you on a separate journey. So always check, you know, what's being requested and look at that versus the scope and the cost. The other point again is a little bit what about Lyndon was saying, and it's about the numbers. Now, I'm an engineer and I love numbers, so I can talk about that all day long. But at some point in time, you should have a general handle on the numbers. And do those numbers look credible? And I'll talk a little bit about which numbers to look for later. But yeah, we do need to check the numbers. And then yeah, do they have credible concepts? You know, what are they providing with what are they providing you with? Do they have plans? Do they have details? Is it still in planning stage? Has planning been granted? You know, what have they got? What have they brought to the table, and how well is that developed? Is it credible? You know, could that be built, or you know, is something kind of amiss in that area of things? You know, and I've said about density planning an area, but I give you an example. We're looking at a particular piece right now, and you know, the planning is in an economic and business zone, and we're looking to do a mixed-use scheme. And so we have to really look around the planning piece, what we can put in there, and adding use classes, and making sure that our design and our model is credible, that we will get through planning and we will get all the other extra pieces towards the development end. So you should also be looking at things like this to make sure that you believe that that deal and that development is also credible. Okay.
Alex, before you move on, we are a community, as I've said tonight, these WealthE Wednesday Power Hours are all about community learning, community sharing. So my invitation is really to all our listeners out there. If you have things you want to add, if you've got, for example, earlier we spoke about sites where you could do bankruptcy checks on directors. You know, there's some that Wealth Migrate use. Alex said he will share his. But if any of you have any ideas or suggestions about how you do things that you would like to add to the conversation tonight, please do drop those into the question box, and we will make sure we share them. We will read them out and share them, but also share them with our Inner Circle community over time. So please do let us know how you do it and any things that you would add to what we're going through tonight. It really is about the community learning and getting together and sharing ideas and resources.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and also good. I'm always learning. So if you've got other sites that you want to check, you know, on bankruptcy checks, then let me know, and I can always pass them on to my other investors as well. So yeah, no, much appreciated for that, Lyndon. So yeah, the next point, I think for me personally, as an investor and developer, the risk and return piece is probably the most important. This is just my personal preference. Because I think there's where you really dig down. You can pick out the numbers and you can really find where those risks are and have they been mitigated. And as an engineer, all my life has been around risk identification and mitigation. Now, you can never get rid of risks 100%, and investments will always carry a risk. But it's about how people and process are put in place to reduce the likelihood. Yeah. And that's really key here. And I think risks is very important for the investor to understand. And what I'm going to go into here is the third point first. And I want you to understand, it's another acronym. You're going to get sick of me telling you about acronyms. It's just how I'm used to operating as an engineer. But in the corporate world, we used to use a model called TCOP. And it was a way of identifying risks. And it's a way that we as users identify risks for every project as well. And so we look at technical, and technical could be issues with the asset. It may be stuff like, you know, is there asbestos there? Is there other land contamination? Do we have an issue with cladding? You know, is there a problem with the soil? You know, will we have to do some deep screw piling? Those are kind of technical risks you may have with a project, and you obviously want to identify these up front because they will have a cost implication, but also then an implication for the investor. Economic and financial things. So this tends to be around the money piece. It could be around the development finance that a developer needs to get hold of. It could be around the investment, initial investment seed. How is that? You know, what are the risks with the developer taking on a certain amount of financial debt? You know, will they be able to repay that debt? What is their plan to pay that debt? Those are the kind of economic and financial risks that you would want to look at. You've then got more commercial and business related risks. They can be specifically contractually, you know, perhaps, you know, in the UK right now, we've had a number of main contractors, of building contractors have gone bust in previous times. That would be a commercial risk. And so you would want to understand how has the developer mitigated against that? You know, how are they doing their design to mitigate against any other commercial risk? The other point is O, which is organizational, and that can be very operational as well. So do they have a team in place? Typically, you know, is there constraints on the founder? Is there constraints on the management? How will they operationally look after this project? Those are very important to know because that will obviously affect how well your project is delivered, and ultimately your returns will come back. And the last piece with any kind of main project, whether it's development, commercial, or residential, is typically around planning. And the best way to mitigate that is to come in as an investor post planning. But there'll always be impacts. Perhaps in the UK, for instance, we have something called Section 106, which are obligations for the developer to take on when they're going to do a development. And they can have quite a high financial impact, but they can also have a community impact. So you sometimes want to have a look at what are those planning obligations. Even though planning may be granted, it may still cause some back-end obligations, which could cause yourself as an investor to have issues with getting your money back. But always try and look holistically and use that teacup as a way to judge and try and pick out the risks when you're looking at that deal. One of the main ones, again, is review capital versus your wealth. How much capital do you need to risk? I think as a general basis, you know, if we look at wealth management from a trading or a stock case, I think the normal number is 2%. Never risk more than 2% of your total pot on any one trade. Now, what I would say is it's up to you how to decide that, but you know, 5 to 10% of your total capital, of your total wealth pot, you know, make sure you try not to ever expose yourself too much on one deal. Never try and chase the big, you know, the big bang for your buck. Be smart about how you invest your capital and the amount of capital as well. Don't be scared to ask the questions.
There's a comment that's come through from one of our viewers. It's come through from a Mandy, and I'm going to read it out loud, partly because it's got a plug for Wealth Migrate at the end of her comment. But she says, yeah, I'm an entry-level investor with a full-time job. I can't do these checks, so my strategy is to make sure the sponsor has the right experience and results that show that their team is doing these checks. Agree with earlier comment about making sure you invest with the right sponsor. And then here's the bit I love. Wealth Migrate has helped, and that is why I invest through them.
Correct.
So there you go.
I think
she makes an interesting point. You know, I think for your average investor who this isn't what they do full time. You know, they want to build a diversified portfolio over time. They don't necessarily have the time or the expertise to go and do a full tech op risk research. For them, it would then surely about making sure they're investing with sponsors that they trust to be doing these kind of checks.
Yeah, understand. And this is like, so I would say this is a very detailed slide, and also I can't tell the whole process of how you do a deal analysis or death by analysis, some call it. You know, I've put a little slide on here, and this is something that we utilize. This is our deal and analyzer and how we go through all that risk element from an economic and commercial perspective. But the idea is to give you those tools. So if you did want to check, you've got a baseline and a framework to do it. I think, real key is find something that you are happy with. And if you've got a platform like Migrate, or you've got a good sponsor who can demonstrate this, then you're half the way there. And this model is just to give you an overall, the tools essentially to do it if you did want to do this yourself.
Yeah, Alex, and I like it. I'm hoping that next time we have a webinar with one of our sponsors, all our investors are going to pop up with questions such as, hi, can you explain the technical risks in your deal? Or please, what are your organizational and operational risks? So that we can put those questions to the sponsor. So even if you're not able to do these risks yourself, just being able to ask a question like this that has a slight technical bit to it, you might be able to test the sponsor you're dealing with. So I think they're great for investors listening tonight. Some great questions you have to almost have in your pocket or on your cell phone as a little reminders that when you are doing in conversations or on webinars with sponsors, that you can just pop out your favorites and drop them into the question box.
Correct. I think this is exactly what I want. I'm just trying to create little pieces so that you can take away and just fire them back. Put some of the developers may put them on edge, but that's the point. You want to be making sure that they've covered all their bases. And if they haven't done it, then they should be able to go and answer those questions for you. Just on the return piece, I've put in some bits and pieces here. We look typically on return as three elements: the project return. That's something a little bit more technical. There's personal returns, which is obviously very important for yourselves. And then there's a non-tangible. Just on personal returns, in the UK, and what I'm used to working with is return on capital employed. What money, cash on cash, will you get back at the end, essentially? You should have a really good knowledge of that. And for examples, for our kind of deals, I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but this is a typical benchmark for other investors. If from an equity side of things, so where you actually have ownership in that business, typically we look at low, medium and high cases, yeah? And we would never offer an equity deal which was less than 17% return on capital employed. And that's an annualized number. Always make sure your return on capital employed, your cash on cash number, find out what that is annualized. Because if you might have a 20% return on capital employed, it's going to take you 3 years to get it. That's only 6.5%. You need to understand what that return looks like on an annualized basis. You've got IRRs, there's other bits and pieces, but I find that the ROCE and ROCE annualized is always an essential way just to see, benchmark how your product or your investment will be doing. The other piece as well, which a lot of people don't ask for, and I think investors should do, is the non-tangible, the return on knowledge, the return on interaction, and the return on intelligence. We offer a learn and earn program for a lot of our investors who want to understand the process. They may want to get into development themselves, or they may want to get into a commercial investment. And we'll go through the steps through the project, and we offer a monthly mastermind. And it's a really good way for the investor to get a little bit more information out. It can then get them as much or as little involved in future. So never be afraid to go back and ask if there is some kind of learn and earn program or a return of knowledge. So yeah, I think, I'm not going to go through the other pieces too much. I think the key here is, understand what the risks are, understand how you're going to get your return, what that number looks like, and then always make sure you do sensitivity analysis. The what if scenario, what if build costs increase, what if sale prices decrease, what if the build timeline extends. You don't need to worry about calculating those numbers, but you should ask the developer, what happens if? What happens to my return if these happen? And they should be able to give you a very clear picture of that. So yeah, I think that works well with what you were saying, Lyndon, just having the questions to work from. So the next piece is the exit. There's not too much you really want to know about exit. What I always say is that you should always have 3 viable options of a way to get out. and they should look at the project from start to end. Again, exit route sensitivities are very, very important, and always go back to the sponsor and ask them, what if, you can't get the exit result you wanted? What if you can't sell all the residential apartments? What if you can't lease out the commercial space? What happens if your main contractor goes bust? What happens if there's a credit default? Ask those really tough questions. I call it the Rusk position, which is your really up shit creek position. And you want to know what that really up shit creek position is very early on. It's very important that you have the worst position possible. And that maybe sounds a little bit negative, but you should always know what you're walking into. And never feel that you can't ask those questions. I always encourage our investors to make sure they find out what their position is at all times. And you want to be able to ensure that when you do hit that Rusk position, you are able to exit, and ideally exit whole or as close to whole as possible. So your money is always protected. Now, that might not always be possible. We ask those questions to develop and say, how are you ensuring that we can exit as planned? And if not, how are we going to exit in the project when the parachute is pulled? And I think that's really important. A lot of people they look at the exit as the one preferred, but they never really consider what happens. In the UK, we've got Brexit right now, as you guys all are aware. We have no idea how the changing landscape and how that will happen. So having those exit routes and abilities to package and parcel and pull that parachute is really important for the investor, but also the project. So yeah, make sure you do ask them. And like I said, the key points I put in place was make sure you all your legal agreements, have that in place. Now, Wealth Migrate do a fantastic job for you on your behalf, but always make sure you're reading through the investor agreements. Make sure you consider even third-party reviewing. Like I said, our investors have just done some third-party due diligence, and I wholly 100% supported that, because then that gives them the confidence to move forward, but also gives me a second opinion to make sure all my guys who are in my professional team are also doing the best job for us at the project. So yeah, when you're connected to the deal, always be transparent, be direct, and make sure you find out your Rusk position. And I think that's all I've got to say on that. Lyndon, is there anything you would like to know on the exit piece? Any other pieces?
No, I do like your Rusk analogy. I think it's great. We certainly do have a worst case scenario that I think everyone should be asking. What is worst case scenario? But I think your Rusk one is far more eloquent. Definitely, I think that's a great option going forward.
Perfect. So we've got two more points, and I'll pop through these. Security. Again, security is a really big piece for any investor, because you need to make sure you've got the confidence to know what's going to happen with your capital. And I break this down into three areas: the security of your money, which is number one; security of the deal, how do you make sure that actually completes so that you can get a return, and then the security of the return itself. The capital piece, you always want to know what's being offered, and I would strongly advise against, this is my personal preference, and I would definitely not do that, of going into a deal where there was not at least one form of protection of that capital. And there's many ways there can be. I've listed a few there, but ideally you'd want something which provides a first charge on the property or a first charge on the business, so you've got some protection that when the shit hits the fan, you're able to pull that capital out as an investor. And really talk around that piece. Ask the questions, what form of protection are you going to give me here? And don't be afraid to ask your professional team for their advice on whether that's an acceptable risk or not. The security of the deal and development. This is a really important one that not a lot of people think about, because they secure the capital with a first charge, but then they find out that the developer hasn't put in sufficient protection for the deal itself, to actually mature and for them to get a return. You never really want to be in a position where you have to then extract your original capital. So the main problem that all developments, whether it's commercial, residential, the reason why a lot of them don't work is from poor cash flow management. So cash flow is king, and especially when you've got a lot of additional costs. In the UK, you have VAT, value added tax, and I'm sure we all have them in various forms. You know, and that can be up to 20% paid on a lot of costs, especially on professional fees and build fees. Varies depending on what you do, but that's a monthly cost. And if you do not factor that in into your cash flow predictions, that could really send a project the wrong way. So make sure there's sufficient cash, make sure the cash flow analysis is good, and then make sure that everything is insured. And I'm talking about the team, the asset, the developer, his ass, collateral warranties, whatever you want to look at it, make sure that there's sufficient contract sewn in. And you don't necessarily have to do that. You know, if it's a very big deal, you can ask that question or prove to me how you how it's securing the long-term future of the project. That should be a very simple thing for any developer in any industry to be able to tell you. And they should be able to point to this document, this team member, and this cash flow analysis. And it's up to you then if you want to review it or you have that trust and credibility to move to the next stage. And then the last point is the security of the return. It's linked with the exit strategy, but it's kind of looking at the, you know, the risk piece. How, if shit did hit the fan, would you be able to get your original money out? And then typically then what you would like to look at and ask for is a red book valuation. Now that's what it's called in the UK, but essentially it's just a valuation company who've got the appropriate PI and qualifications who can value a property. And they'll give you an overall value, but they'll also give you what's called a fire sale value, a 6-month and a 3-month fire sale. And that's to say, look, if everything went wrong and they needed to get it into an auction, what do you think you could make from that? And it's, you know, sometimes good to check those values to make sure there's enough money kept in that property to then pay back everybody. You know, it may be just something you ask and say, look, have you had a red book valuation? What's your fire sale values? As soon as an investor asks me that question, I know I'm dealing with somebody who's, you know, who's really known their stuff, and that puts the developer on a different path along with the investor as well. The other things to check for would be your corporate structure. You know, I'm bullet pointing a lot of things here, but I just want to emphasize the different areas that we look at when we look at a deal. And a corporate structure is very important to understand. And that this is my little, my lovely little diagram here. How does the flow of money come in? So from investors to the deal, and how is the security passed back through? Yeah, so in this case, money's coming from investors and money's coming from a finance company. And then how is that company and how are those investors getting protection coming back in? In this case, it's a shareholder in debenture, and then from the finance company, it's fair charge on a property. And you should be able to see a corporate structure like this, and it should be very visible and should be transparent on how to do that. Now, Wealth Migrate do a lot of great work in the background on your behalf, so I know this working with the guys, so I can honestly say that. So they do a great job of that. But again, you know, in general, this is something to look at if you were to ever look at something separate to the Wealth Migrate. So yeah, I think the security piece, it can be a little bit daunting, but essentially you just look at those 3 areas: protect your capital, make sure the deal will go ahead, and always make sure that whenever you want to get out, you've got sufficient cash to do that. So finally, the last piece, and that's the timeline and trust element. And you know, I think timeline speaks for itself. Like I was talking about before, return on capital employed or your cash on cash. When do you get paid that money? You know, great if you get 20% return, but if it takes 10 years, then that's not a good return. So how long will the project take? What are the key milestones? You know, ask them for a project timeline. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Microsoft project. It doesn't have to be the all singing, all dancing, float, you know, dependency charts. But you should have an understanding of the key dates. You know, when will planning come in? When will design happen? When will fit out happen? When do a tenant come in? And when do we exit? and they should be able to give you appropriate responsibilities for those sections. So who will look after that particular stage? You know, do they have a professional team who will do that? It speaks a lot about a developer and a particular deal if they've got their own professional team looking after this. So if they've got a project manager, have they got a quantity surveyor, do they have planning consultants looking after those particular issues? Because it then shows and demonstrates that they know where their strengths lie, and that is on the overall conduct and not on the individual pieces. And it gives you that confidence that they've got your best interest at heart. But look at the plan, look at the time frames, just look at it from a common sense perspective. Ask those what if questions. You know, what happens if the project is delayed? What happens if the loan agreement overruns? What will we get then? You know, what will actually happen? And don't be afraid to again ask for more material to support your decision. Yeah. And then hopefully once you put all of those pieces together, you've got the credibility, you've got the return, you've got the exit, you've got the security, and you understand the timeline. That should develop the trust. You use your own team, use Wealth Migrate, use the community to build that trust. Ask the questions, use them as a buffer. Don't be afraid of asking more questions. As a developer, I love getting questions from investors because it shows they're engaged and shows that they really want this project to succeed as well. So never be afraid of asking that. And the ultimate question is, do I trust you to deliver an outstanding project, work in a professional manner, which is at our mutual best interests? If you feel after your research, and it could be just doing one, it could be doing them all, but if you get to a yes point to answer that question, then you are ready to move to that next level. And yeah, that's the 5 keys essentially. Just to close up, I think a good way for any person to understand all of this information, and I think Lyndon as well, you mentioned earlier that one of the listeners was saying, well, I just don't have time to do all of this. Any good developer or any good sponsor should have an investor memorandum available where they answer all of this for you. So essentially you can have a document where all of these points, every piece of the crest is answered. We do this for all of our developments, and we put all of these pieces in so that those questions don't have to be asked. There may be more, but all that information is in one place for the investor to make that decision. And make sure you do ask for that information. Make sure you are fully up to date with what is needed to help you get to that decision. And then ultimately, this is my last point, and then because I realise we're running a little bit late here. The CPD, your continual professional development. We're all here to learn, and make sure that this due diligence piece is continual and it's ongoing. And if you don't have that answer and you feel you can't, look to other places. Look at courses. If you wanted to get into the technical piece on death by PowerPoint, death by spreadsheet, there are courses that can do that. I can happily pass you on to a lot of courses I've done. I still do courses on the development side, and I recommend everyone does it so they can get an understanding and appreciation of that field. Books, literature, we've got the inner circle network. There's a lot of other communities outside of Wealth Migrate, although I know they won't want me to plug them, but you guys have your own networks. So utilize those communities, ask those questions, get a mentor, do masterminds. Like I said, we run a mastermind every month, which is aimed just to help those investors get that knowledge. So yeah, I think those are really key to help continually improve your due diligence and get you to that answer in that ultimate question of, do I feel that this is a secure enough transaction and that we're both working in the best interests? So Lyndon, I think that is it from my side. Just put on here it's a QR code, because on our website we do provide a lot of information. I think Lee has a lot of that information anyway that she's put onto the Wealth Migrate University. So make sure you check out Wealth Migrate University. A lot of what we've done is in there. But every month we put out 2 new pieces of content for investors. If you'd like to sign up just to our newsletter and get those pieces of information, feel free to scan that code. and join that news list. We love to help investors in every walk of life. Again, we pass all that information on to Wealth Migrate as well as part of their university, so feel free to check out on that side as well. And hopefully that's been of use.
Wow, Alex, that was a huge amount of information. A lot of those questions are not questions that we hear often during our webinars with sponsors from our investors. Your timing is perfect. We're on the hour. But what I'm really hoping as we go forward is that our investors are going to show up at webinars in future with our sponsors, armed with a whole bunch of new questions to be putting our sponsors on the spot. And I guess the good news is that hopefully within 2 or 3 weeks, they might be putting you on the spot as we bring our first UCITS deal through the platform. That is coming. We are working with Alex on a deal that will soon be arriving on our platform, so you can look out for a UCITS deal coming soon. And it would be a great sign of the success of tonight if all our investors show up for that webinar armed with a whole bunch of tough questions that Alex has provided you to ask directly. So I really appreciate that and all your input tonight. We will make sure, Lee, to distribute the presentation from Alex out onto the attendance list as well as to the inner circle. Is that correct?
Yep, that is correct. We will be giving out the presentation to the attendees and a copy of the webinar to everybody, and as well onto our inner circle the copy of our of the presentation. So yeah, Alex, that was an amazing webinar. As Lyndon said, you touched on some really tough questions that people are going to ask, and I look forward to our next two sponsors that come on, because I think you're going to be the second. We've got one that's almost due to go live either late this week or early next week, and I look forward to the shock on that sponsor's face when he realizes our investors mean business, and I look forward to the recognition on your face when we have that webinar where you realize that our investors actually do listen, take on board what we share with them. So thank you very much for all your content and everything that you gave us tonight. It was really interesting.
Good. I think a smart investor is good for everyone, not just themselves, but for developers, because you want to have a most engaged audience and participants on a development, because then that really helps the success of the development move forward. So yeah. Good luck, guys. Good luck with your
absolutely. So as Leah said, we have 3 new sponsors actually joining us this month. In February, it's going to be a busy month in terms of bringing new sponsors on, of which USA will be one of them, and we have 2 others that are joining us this month. So really looking forward to the investors coming with a whole bunch of new questions. Guys, we appreciate that we're 3 or 4 minutes over time. We appreciate that tonight, or whatever time it is wherever you are in the world, you could have chosen to be a lot of other places. Instead, you chose to be with us and sharing as a community our knowledge and our information. So we really appreciate it. Wherever you are, we hope you have a fantastic evening or day ahead of you. Alex, final really big thank you from all of us at Wealth Migrate, and we look forward to seeing you in the Wealth Migrate community going forward, both as a sponsor but also continuing to contribute the huge amounts of learnings you have for our community. And then finally, to our attendees, thanks for joining. If you're not part of the inner circle, please do reach out to Lee. It's a fantastic community initiative where we have dedicated webinars dedicated for learning. There are chat groups on WhatsApp and other forums where you can share information with each other, ask questions, and generally make sure you're continuing to invest in your own ability to become a better investor and broaden your portfolio. So with that, I really want to say good night. Thank you very much to everyone. Thank you, Lee. As usual, our head of community, great having you online. And Alex, once again, great thank you to you. And good night to everyone else.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.